Welcome to The Garden House, a story of second chances, enduring love, and the unexpected blossoming of life after loss. In the heart of Charleston's historic district, George Thompson, a recent widower, finds himself adrift, his familiar world upended by grief and the looming threat of change. But on the quiet streets of Harmony Springs, amidst the scent of jasmine and the whispers of the past, a new connection sparks, and a forgotten history reawakens, proving that even in the twilight years, life can offer a vibrant and unexpected bloom. Prepare to be swept away by a tale of community, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit, where the echoes of the past intertwine with the promise of a hopeful future. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Dusting off the ghosts of Gibby Street. The Charleston sun, already assertive even at this early hour, casts long shadows across the wide, oak-lined street. George Thompson, a recent widower with eyes that held the gentle melancholy of a long and storied past, stood on his front porch, a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. 63 years he'd lived, and nearly all of them had been spent within the embrace of this historic district. The scent of jasmine and salt air, a familiar Charleston perfume, did little to soothe the ache in his chest. Retirement from teaching history at Ashley Ridge High felt less like a victory lap and more like an aimless drift. He looked out as his view began, the sun casting a gentle shadow on what he has done. He was thankful and ready to relax. The house, a grand 3-story Charleston single house with double side porches, stood as a testament to his family's history, a legacy he felt increasingly burdened to protect. Its faded pastel yellow paint, peeling in delicate curls, seemed to whisper tales of generations past, his grandfather's return from the Great War, his own wedding to Elizabeth on the front steps, the countless family gatherings where laughter spilled out onto the jasmine-scented air. He could still see his 3 children taking their first steps, and see their laughter. He'd raised his children here: Jennifer, the ever-practical lawyer in Atlanta, Mark, the restless entrepreneur in California, and Emily, the free-spirited artist who'd surprisingly settled in a small Vermont town. They were good kids, successful in their own ways, but they didn't feel this place, this history, the way he did. He could not blame them, it was their choices. Elizabeth, his beloved Elizabeth, would have known what to do with his newfound emptiness. Her passing a year ago had left a void that no amount of sweet tea or familiar routines could fill. She had been the gardener, the keeper of the vibrant blooms that spilled from window boxes and climbed the ancient brick walls. He, on the other hand, could barely keep a potted fern alive. A throat-clearing brought him back to the present. Mrs. Thompson, his neighbor across the street and the formidable president of the Gibby's Street Garden Club, stood on the sidewalk, her floral print dress a stark contrast to her stern expression. "Morning, George," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the humid air. "Those camellias are looking dreadful. Elizabeth would be having a fit." George winced. He knew. The camellias, Elizabeth's pride and joy, were drooping, their leaves tinged with brown. He'd been neglecting them, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks Elizabeth had handled with such effortless grace. "Morning, Betty," he replied, trying for a cheerful tone. "They're adjusting to the new management." Betty snorted, a sound that conveyed both skepticism and pity. "Adjusting to neglect, you mean? You need to get that Mitchell woman over here." "Sarah, is it? Heard she's a whiz with gardens." The suggestion of Sarah Mitchell, his new neighbor, sparked a flicker of irritation. He'd seen her, of course, moving into the smaller, somewhat neglected house next door. She was younger, recently divorced, and, if the neighborhood gossip was to be believed, a landscape designer. George wasn't opposed to change, per se, but he preferred his change slow, deliberate, and respectful of the past. A landscape designer sounded disruptive. "I'll manage, Betty," he said, forcing a smile. "Just getting my bearings." Betty Thompson, however, was not easily deterred. "George, you know the garden club meeting is this week. We'll be discussing the proposed development on Meeting Street. You will be there, won't you?" The proposed development was a euphemism for a monstrous, modern monstrosity that threatened to overshadow the historic district's carefully preserved charm. A developer, armed with slick brochures and empty promises, was attempting to push through plans for a multi-story glass and steel structure that would house luxury condos and chain stores. Of course, Betty, George sighed. He'd been dreading the meeting. He knew what was expected of him, a passionate defense of tradition, a stirring speech about preserving their heritage. But the fight had gone out of him lately. The prospect of battling yet another encroachment of modernity felt exhausting. As Betty Thompson marched away, her floral dress a blur against the backdrop of historic homes, George took another sip of his lukewarm coffee. He looked at his neglected garden, then across the street at the new neighbor, Sarah Mitchell's house. He saw a flicker of movement behind the curtains. A small, almost imperceptible part of him, a part that had been dormant for too long, began to stir. Maybe, just maybe, a little disruption wasn't such a bad thing after all. He then smiled, knowing what he would do. To ask her and ask the community for help. Chapter 2. Charleston Charm and Concrete Plans. The afternoon sun, filtered through the leaves of the ancient live oaks, dappled the brick sidewalk as George walked towards Sarah Mitchell's house. He felt a strange mixture of reluctance and anticipation. He'd always been a creature of habit, comfortable in the predictable rhythms of his life. Engaging with a stranger, a landscape designer no less, felt like stepping outside his carefully constructed comfort zone. He paused at the gate, taking in the small, two-story house. Unlike his own meticulously maintained, at least, it used to be residence, this one showed signs of neglect. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung slightly askew, and the small front garden was a tangle of overgrown weeds and wilting flowers. It mirrored, in a way, the state of his own life, a once vibrant space now shrouded in a quiet sort of disrepair. He took a deep breath and pushed open the gate, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. As he approached the front porch, he noticed Sarah Mitchell kneeling amidst the weeds, her back to him. She was wearing faded jeans and a well-worn t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She seemed completely absorbed in her task, her hands moving with a deftness and precision that surprised him. Clearing his throat, he announced his presence. "Ms. Mitchell?" Sarah startled, dropping a trowel with a clatter. She turned, her face flushing slightly as she stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, widened in surprise as she recognized him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice a little breathless. I didn't hear you come in." George offered a tentative smile. "Please call me George." "And you're Sarah, right?" "Yes," she replied, returning his smile. "It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you, from Mrs. Thompson." George winced inwardly. He could only imagine what Betty Thompson had said. He was probably portrayed as the grumpy old man of Gibby's Street, stubbornly clinging to the past. "I hope it was all good," he said, trying for a light tone. Sarah chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that eased his apprehension. "Let's just say she's very passionate about preserving the neighborhood's character." "That she is," George agreed, a hint of fondness in his voice. Betty Thompson might be a force of nature, but her heart was in the right place. He gestured towards the overgrown garden. I noticed your yard. And well, my own garden isn't exactly in pristine condition. My wife, Elizabeth, she was the one with the green thumb. She passed away last year." His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, the grief still raw and close to the surface. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, the emptiness that seemed to follow him everywhere. Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, George," she said gently. "It must be incredibly difficult." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It is. But life goes on, I suppose. And the camellias are suffering." Sarah's gaze drifted towards his house, her eyes taking in the neglected garden. "I see," she said. "They're beautiful camellias. They just need a little TLC." "That's what I was hoping you could provide," George said, taking a deep breath. "I'd be willing to pay you, of course, for your time and expertise." Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. "I'm not sure, George," she said. "I'm still getting settled in." And I have a lot of work to do on my own place. George's heart sank. He'd hoped she would agree, that he wouldn't have to face the daunting task of restoring Elizabeth's garden alone. I understand, he said, trying to mask his disappointment. I just thought, but Sarah interrupted, her green eyes sparkling with a sudden glint of mischief. Maybe we could help each other. I could use some advice on the history of this house, the neighborhood. You could show me around, tell me the stories. And in exchange, I could offer some gardening tips. George stared at her, surprised by her offer. It wasn't what he'd expected, but it was intriguing. A chance to share his knowledge, his love for Charleston, with someone new. A chance to connect with his past while simultaneously stepping into an uncertain future. That sounds like a fair trade, he said, a smile spreading across his face. Wonderful, Sarah said, her own smile widening. How about we start tomorrow morning? Say, 9 o'clock? I'll bring the coffee. As George walked back to his house, his steps felt lighter, his spirits lifted. He had taken a step outside his comfort zone, and it had led to an unexpected connection, a potential partnership. He glanced back at Sarah's house, noticing for the first time the vibrant colors of a few newly planted flowers peeking through the weeds. The concrete plans of his old life were crumbling, replaced by the promise of something new, something unknown, something hopeful. He had a feeling this was only beginning, but it was to come along as his new view, a new change, began. The walk may have come in handy for it all. Chapter 3. The Azalea's Rebellion. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, creating a heady blend that filled George's senses. He stood on his porch, watching Sarah approach, her green eyes sparkling with an energy that seemed to invigorate the very air around her. She carried a thermos in one hand and a small, battered notebook in the other. "Morning, George," she said, her smile bright and welcoming. "Ready for our first lesson?" George chuckled, feeling a flutter of anticipation in his chest. He hadn't felt this energized in years. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied. "Though I'm not sure how much of a teacher I'll be." "Nonsense," Sarah said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from the thermos. "You've lived here your whole life. You know this place better than anyone." They settled into the rocking chairs on his porch, the gentle creaking of the wood a familiar and comforting sound. George took a sip of the coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. It was stronger than he usually made it, but he found he liked it. "So," Sarah said, opening her notebook, "tell me about your camellias. What's their story?" George looked at the drooping shrubs, their once vibrant blooms now faded and withered. "They were Elizabeth's," he said, his voice soft with remembrance. "She planted them years ago. Said they reminded her of her grandmother's garden in Savannah." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the azalea bushes that lined the walkway, their vibrant pink blossoms a stark contrast to the neglected camellias. The azaleas, though they seemed to be doing just fine on their own. Almost defiant. Sarah followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Azaleas are resilient," she said. "They can thrive in even the harshest conditions. But they also need care, attention. Just like people." The unspoken implication hung in the air, a gentle reminder of his own emotional state, his own need for care and attention. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding her gaze. "Tell me about the house," Sarah said, changing the subject. "What's its history?" George, relieved to be on firmer ground, launched into a detailed account of the house's construction in the early 1800s, its role as a Union hospital during the Civil War, and its subsequent ownership by generations of his family. He spoke of the original architect, a man named Gabriel Manigault, and of the house's unique features, such as the double-side porches designed to catch the prevailing breezes. As he spoke, Sarah listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes in her notebook. She asked questions, insightful questions, that prompted him to delve deeper into his memories, to unearth details he hadn't thought about in years. "It's fascinating, George," she said, her eyes shining with genuine interest. "This house is a living testament to Charleston's history. It deserves to be preserved, cherished." Her words resonated with him, stirring a sense of pride and responsibility. He had always valued the house, its history, but He hadn't realized how much it meant to him until this moment, until he saw it through Sarah's eyes. "We're having a meeting with the garden club next week," George said, remembering Betty Thompson's stern reminder. "They're discussing the Meeting Street development." Sarah's expression turned serious. "I heard about that," she said. "It's a terrible idea. It would completely destroy the character of the neighborhood." "I agree," George said. "But I'm not sure what we can do to stop it." "We have to try," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to fight for what we believe in. We have to protect this place, its history, its beauty." Her words, spoken with such conviction, ignited a spark within him. He had been feeling defeated, resigned to the inevitable march of progress. But Sarah's passion, her energy, reminded him that he still had a voice, that he could still make a difference. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the porch, George and Sarah continued to talk, their conversation flowing easily from gardening tips to local history to the challenges of preserving the past in a rapidly changing world. He found himself drawn to her warmth, her intelligence, and her unwavering spirit. She was a breath of fresh air, a vibrant presence that disrupted the quiet melancholy of his life. She listened, understood, and to be with a person who was full of energy made him feel great. He looked at his house and looked at the flowers around. He began to smile. Today may be that start. That his story was beginning again. Chapter 4. Letters from a Forgotten War. The garden club meeting was held, as always, in the grand parlor of Betty Thompson's immaculately preserved antebellum home. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish, lilies, and the unspoken tension that always accompanied discussions of progress in Harmony Springs. George, feeling a surprising surge of protectiveness towards both his neighborhood and Sarah, found himself seated beside her, offering quiet asides about the various personalities in the room. "And that's Mrs. Pinckney," he whispered, gesturing towards a woman with a severe expression and a hat adorned with an improbable number of silk flowers. "She claims to be a direct descendant of Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, but everyone knows her great-grandfather made his fortune selling bootleg liquor during Prohibition." Sarah suppressed a giggle, her eyes sparkling with amusement. George felt a warmth spread through him, a lightness he hadn't experienced in far too long. Betty Thompson, resplendent in a floral dress that clashed violently with the room's muted decor, called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. The discussion quickly turned to the Meeting Street development. Voices were raised, opinions clashed, and the room crackled with an undercurrent of barely contained hostility. Councilmember Davidson, a slick-haired man with a politician's smile, presented the developer's plans, emphasizing the economic benefits and downplaying the historical impact. He spoke of jobs, tax revenue, and a vibrant, modern addition to Harmony Springs. George, his blood simmering, stood to speak. He reminded the members of the garden club of their stated mission, to preserve the beauty and historical integrity of the neighborhood. He spoke of the importance of protecting their heritage, of honoring the past, of resisting the relentless march of homogenization. His words, though passionate, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Several members, swayed by Davidson's promises of economic prosperity, expressed their support for the development. Others remained silent, their faces etched with uncertainty. Sarah, sensing George's frustration, stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. Betty Thompson, surprised by Sarah's intervention, hesitated for a moment before nodding curtly. "You're not a member, Ms. Mitchell, but I suppose we can hear your perspective." Sarah took a deep breath and addressed the room. "I'm new to Harmony Springs," she said, "but I've already fallen in love with this place. I've seen the beauty of its architecture, the richness of its history, and the warmth of its community. And I believe that this development would irrevocably damage all of that." She spoke of the importance of living preservation, of finding ways to adapt and evolve while still honoring the past. She suggested a compromise, a way to incorporate modern amenities without sacrificing the historic character of the neighborhood. Her words, spoken with passion and conviction, began to sway the room. Even Mrs. Pinckney, beneath her elaborate hat, seemed to be listening intently. Council member Davidson, however, remained unmoved. "Ms. Mitchell's ideas are charming," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "but unrealistic. Progress requires change. And change, sometimes, requires sacrifice." Before Sarah could respond, George felt a sudden urge to delve into his family history, a place he hadn't truly explored in years. "I need to take a look into my attic," he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. Excusing himself, George hurried home, leaving Sarah to navigate the increasingly heated debate. He climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the air growing thick with dust and the scent of forgotten memories. The attic was a repository of generations, a jumble of old furniture, discarded toys, and boxes overflowing with letters, photographs, and documents. He hadn't been up here since Elizabeth's death, the task of sorting through their shared past too painful to contemplate. But now, driven by a newfound urgency, he began to search. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt a pull, a sense that something important was hidden amidst the clutter, something that could help him save Harmony Springs. After hours of searching, his hands covered in dust, his eyes stinging from the dim light, he found it. A small, wooden chest, tucked away in a far corner of the attic. He recognized it instantly, Elizabeth's grandmother's hope chest. He lifted the chest, its weight surprisingly heavy. He carried it downstairs to the living room and placed it on the coffee table. He hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest, then slowly opened the lid. Inside, nestled amongst layers of yellowed tissue paper, he found a collection of old letters tied together with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was delicate and spidery, the ink faded with time. He carefully untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were dated during the Civil War, written by a young Confederate soldier to his sweetheart in Charleston. As George read, he was transported back in time, immersed in a story of love, loss, and the brutal realities of war. He recognized, to his astonishment, a name. It was the same one who crafted the beautiful structure, and it was someone close to his own family. The soldier was an ancestor, someone he barely knew existed. And as the words began to flow, he learned of how his very home, his block, had been impacted. He even had stories from the very beginning of what was now known as the town of Harmony Springs. And then he saw the plea of one in the war begging, praying for something, anything, to come and help. The plea to maintain, protect, and help this world from disappearing, from greed, from what may come to all who call this town a sanctuary, a haven. He had found it after all these decades. He was the one. It could finally come through. He could see it. George smiled, with his head now focused and full of power, ready for the next step. Chapter 5. Supper, Sermons, and Suspicions. George emerged from the attic, hours later, his mind buzzing with the weight of his discovery. The letters had not only illuminated a poignant chapter of his family history, but had also revealed a crucial detail, a hidden clause in the original deed to his property, and several others on Gibby Street, stipulating that the land could never be used for commercial purposes. It was a long shot, but it was something. A legal foothold against the developers. He immediately called Sarah, his voice trembling with excitement. She listened, her initial surprise quickly turning to shared enthusiasm. "This could be it, George," she exclaimed. "This could be the leverage we need." They agreed to meet the next morning at the diner to strategize. The intervening hours were filled with a restless energy. George couldn't sleep, his mind replaying the soldier's words, the echoes of a forgotten war mingling with the present-day battle for Harmony Springs. Sunday morning in Harmony Springs was a ritual, a slow, deliberate unfolding of traditions. Church bells chimed, summoning the faithful to worship. Families, dressed in their Sunday best, strolled along the sidewalks, exchanging greetings and sharing snippets of news. The air was thick with the aroma of frying bacon and freshly brewed coffee. George, however, felt anything but peaceful. He attended the service at St. Michael's, a towering edifice of white-painted brick that had stood sentinel over the town for centuries. But the sermon, usually a source of comfort and reflection, washed over him without making an impact. His thoughts were consumed by the letters, by the impending confrontation with Councilman Davidson and the developers. After the service, he joined the usual gathering on the church steps, exchanging pleasantries with his neighbors. He spotted Betty Thompson, her floral dress a riot of color against the somber backdrop of the church, holding court with a group of garden club ladies. He approached them, hoping to enlist Betty's support. He knew she was a formidable force in the community, and her influence could be crucial. "Betty," he said, his voice earnest, "I need to talk to you about the Meeting Street development. I've found something important." Betty Thompson, her eyebrows raised in curiosity, excused herself from the group and led George to a quiet corner of the churchyard. He explained his discovery, showing her copies of the letters and the relevant clause in the old deed. Betty listened intently, her expression shifting from skepticism to grudging admiration. "Well, I'll be," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "That old rascal, your ancestor, he was a sly one." She paused, her gaze turning thoughtful. "This could change things, George," she said. "This could give us a fighting chance." She promised to rally the garden club members, to put pressure on the town council, and to spread the word throughout the community. George, feeling a surge of hope, thanked her profusely. As he walked towards Mac's diner for his planned meeting with Sarah, he noticed a group of unfamiliar men standing outside the diner, their faces grim, their expressions menacing. They were dressed in dark suits and ties, their demeanor a stark contrast to the relaxed Sunday atmosphere of Harmony Springs. He recognized one of the men, Colonel Davies, his presence a chilling reminder of the forces arrayed against them. Davies's eyes met his, and a sinister smile spread across his face, a smile that sent a shiver of apprehension down George's spine. George hesitated for a moment, then squared his shoulders and walked towards the diner, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't going to be intimidated. He wasn't going to back down. He was going to fight for his home, his history, and his community. He knew that he had to tell Sarah. Mac, too, would need to be informed. There was too much love in this town, not enough fight. And the two, combined with their own charm, will help it prevail for all to see and cheer on, not to mention those who are going to be involved soon. They could not afford to lose to those who stood only to do harm and evil, to bring destruction to such beauty. As the time flew, so did they. They were ready to fight at last. Chapter 6. The Garden Club's Gambit. George pushed open the diner door, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon doing little to calm his racing heart. He found Sarah already seated at their usual booth, a stack of papers and a laptop spread out before her. She looked up, her green eyes filled with concern. "What's wrong, George?" she asked, immediately noticing his agitated state. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He briefly recounted his encounter with Colonel Davies and the menacing men outside. Sarah's expression turned grim, her initial optimism fading. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she said, her voice low. "Davies isn't going to give up without a fight." Before they could discuss a strategy, Betty Thompson burst into the diner, her floral dress practically vibrating with indignation. She was followed by a phalanx of garden club ladies, their faces a mixture of determination and righteous anger. "George!" "Sarah!" Betty exclaimed, her voice ringing through the diner. "We have a situation." She explained that Councilman Davidson, under pressure from the developers and likely fueled by some less than legal incentives, had scheduled an emergency town council meeting for that very afternoon. He was planning to push through a vote on the Meeting Street development before George's newly discovered legal clause could be properly vetted. "He's trying to ram this through before we can organize any opposition," Betty said, her voice shaking with fury. "We can't let him get away with it." The garden club ladies, a formidable force when roused, murmured their agreement, their expressions resolute. George felt a surge of admiration for these women, these keepers of tradition and community spirit. Sarah, ever the strategist, jumped into action. "Okay, here's what we need to do," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "We need to mobilize the entire town. We need to pack that town hall meeting and make our voices heard." She outlined a plan, Betty and the garden club would use their extensive network to contact every resident of Harmony Springs, urging them to attend the meeting. George would gather the historical documents, the letters, and the deed to present their legal case. Sarah would prepare a short, impactful presentation highlighting the importance of preserving the historic district and proposing a viable alternative to the destructive development. As they prepared to put their plan into action, the diner door opened again, and the group of men George had seen earlier entered. Colonel Davies, his face a mask of cold calculation, led the way. He strode towards their booth, his eyes fixed on George. "McAllister," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I understand you've been digging up dirt, trying to interfere with progress." George stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "It's not dirt, Davies," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "It's history. It's the truth." Davies chuckled, a humorless sound that sent shivers down Evie's spine. "History is written by the victors, McAllister," he said, "and I intend to be victorious." He gestured towards the men accompanying him. "These gentlemen are here to ensure that you don't cause any trouble." The men, their faces impassive, stepped forward, blocking George's path. They were clearly there to intimidate, to silence any opposition. But before George could react, Betty Thompson stepped forward, her floral dress practically bristling with indignation. "You get out of this diner, Davies," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You and your goons. You're not welcome here." The garden club ladies, a united front, echoed her sentiments, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval. "Get out," they chanted. "Get out! Get out!" Davies, surprised by their unexpected defiance, hesitated for a moment. He looked at the determined faces of the women, their eyes flashing with anger, their hands clenched into fists. He realized that he had underestimated them, that he had underestimated the power of community spirit. He smirked. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was the fun to come. He could not win this, at least not like this, and so to turn around and laugh to their anger had made him whole. With a final glare at George, Davies turned and strode out of the diner, his henchmen following close behind. The diner erupted in cheers, the townspeople celebrating their small but significant victory. They were ready to bring a war, and that was only what they needed. A smile of determination came from Mac, now ready to get at them all. The gambit had started. Now it was time for war. Chapter 7. A Daughter's Plea, a Father's Pride. The hours leading up to the emergency town council meeting were a blur of frantic activity. George, Sarah, and Betty worked tirelessly, gathering documents, preparing presentations, and coordinating their efforts with the rapidly growing network of supporters. News of Colonel Davies's strong-arm tactics and the Garden Club's defiance had spread like wildfire through Harmony Springs. The townspeople, galvanized by a sense of shared purpose, rallied to the cause. They printed flyers, organized phone trees, and used social media, with George finally, reluctantly, creating an account Sarah to spread the word. As George was reviewing the historical documents one last time, a car pulled up to the diner. He looked up, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized the familiar figure stepping out of the vehicle. It was his daughter, Jennifer. Jennifer, a successful lawyer in Atlanta, had always been the most practical and level-headed of his children. She had voiced her concerns about his living alone in the old house, urging him to consider selling it and moving to a retirement community closer to her. "Dad," she said, rushing towards him, her face etched with worry. "I saw the news online. Are you okay? What's going on?" George explained the situation, detailing the threat to the historic district, Colonel Davies's involvement, and their efforts to rally the community. Jennifer listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "This sounds dangerous, Dad," she said. "This Davies character seems like bad news. Maybe you should just let it go." George bristled at her suggestion. "Let it go?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Jennifer, this is our home. This is our history. We can't just stand by and let some corporation destroy it." "But Dad," Jennifer pleaded, "you're retired. You're supposed to be relaxing, enjoying life, not fighting battles you can't win. What could happen or be possible?" George sighed, his shoulders slumping with frustration. He understood her concerns, but he couldn't make her understand the depth of his connection to Harmony Springs, the weight of responsibility he felt to protect its heritage. Before he could respond, Sarah emerged from the diner, her face flushed with determination. She had overheard their conversation and stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Jennifer, I understand your worries," she said. "But your father is not alone. We're all in this together. We're fighting for something important, something worth protecting." She turned to George, her eyes filled with admiration. "Your father is a remarkable man, Jennifer," she said. "He's passionate, he's courageous, and he's deeply committed to this community. He's inspired all of us to stand up for what we believe in." Jennifer looked from Sarah to her father, her expression shifting from concern to a grudging respect. She had never seen her father like this, so energized, so determined, so alive. She had always thought of him as a quiet, reserved history teacher, content with his books and his routines. She hadn't realized the depth of his passion, the strength of his convictions. "I see," she said, her voice softening. "I still don't like it, Dad, but I understand. And I'm proud of you." George's heart swelled with emotion. His daughter's words, her admission of pride, meant the world to him. He had always tried to be a good father, to provide for his children, to guide them on the right path. But he had never felt so connected to them, so understood by them, as he did in this moment. "Thank you, Jennifer," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "That means a lot to me." Jennifer smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. She hugged her father tightly, a silent acknowledgement of their bond, their shared love for Harmony Springs, and their commitment to protecting it. "Just be careful, Dad," she whispered. "Please." George nodded, his resolve strengthened by his daughter's support. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he had his family, his friends, and his community behind him. He was going to win this, and his daughter, too, would find the right path at last. His time had changed for her. Now it all meant a lot more than ever, and as long as he saw her happy. Chapter 8. Blueprints and Battle Lines. The town hall was packed. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls, their faces a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The air crackled with an almost palpable energy, a sense of collective purpose that had rarely been seen in Harmony Springs before. George, Sarah, and Betty sat at the front of the room, facing the town council members. Behind them, the veterans, led by Sergeant Miller, stood in a silent show of solidarity. Jennifer, her initial apprehension replaced by a fierce determination, stood beside her father, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. Councilman Davidson, his face flushed with anger, called the meeting to order. He announced that the purpose of the emergency meeting was to hold a final vote on the Meeting Street development. He reiterated the economic benefits of the project, glossing over the concerns raised by the community. Before he could proceed further, George stood up, his hand raised. "Mr. Mayor," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I request permission to present new evidence that is relevant to this decision." Davidson, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, hesitated for a moment. "What evidence?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. George walked to the front of the room, holding aloft the copies of the Civil War-era letters and the original deed to his property. "These documents," he said, "prove that several properties on Gibby's Street, including my own, are subject to a restrictive covenant that prohibits commercial development." He explained the history of the covenant, the forgotten oath made by his ancestor, and the legal implications for the proposed development. He presented his case calmly and logically, citing relevant legal precedents and historical records. As he spoke, a murmur of excitement spread through the room. The townspeople, their hopes rekindled, began to whisper among themselves. Ms. Harding, the Burger Bliss attorney, jumped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "This is ancient history. This covenant is irrelevant and unenforceable." She launched into a tirade, arguing that the covenant was outdated, that it had been superseded by subsequent legal decisions and that it was unfair to hold a modern development hostage to a centuries-old agreement. But George stood his ground, calmly refuting her arguments, citing legal precedents, and highlighting the importance of preserving historical integrity. Sarah, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward. She presented her alternative proposal, a compromise plan that would allow for some development while still protecting the historic character of the neighborhood. She unveiled a set of architectural renderings, showcasing a design that incorporated traditional Charleston elements, such as brick facades, wrought iron balconies, and landscaped courtyards. She proposed that the development be scaled back, reduced in height and density, to minimize its impact on the surrounding buildings. "We're not against progress," Sarah said, her voice passionate and persuasive. "But we believe that progress should enhance our community, not destroy it. We believe that we can have economic development and preserve our heritage." Her proposal, elegant and well-reasoned, struck a chord with many in the room. Even some of the council members, previously supportive of the Burger Bliss plan, began to look intrigued. Colonel Davies, who had been sitting silently in the back of the room, his face unreadable, finally spoke. "This is all very touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be realistic. This town needs jobs, it needs revenue, it needs to move forward. We can't let sentimentality stand in the way of progress." He stood up and walked towards the front of the room, his eyes fixed on George. "McAllister," he said, "you're living in the past. You're clinging to a world that no longer exists. It's time to wake up and face reality." George looked at Davies, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You're wrong, Davies," he said. "The past is always with us. It shapes who we are, it informs our decisions, and it guides our future. And if we forget the past, we're doomed to repeat its mistakes." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, connecting with the faces of the townspeople. "We're not afraid of progress," he said. "But we're not going to sacrifice our heritage, our identity, our soul, for the sake of money." His words, spoken with conviction and courage, resonated throughout the room. The townspeople, emboldened by his stand, began to cheer, their voices rising in a unified show of support. It was clear that this town wanted to show who was really calling the shots, who stood with what, and who to all be safe, all in the small town of Harmony. Their vision was to see good at long last. It was something more, something great, and something to fight for. Chapter 9. Unearthing the Past, Planting the Future. The cheers echoing through the town hall marked a turning point. Councilman Davidson, sensing the shift in momentum, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He attempted to regain control, calling for order, but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of public opinion. The mayor, seeing the writing on the wall, intervened. He announced that the council would table the vote on the Meeting Street development until further notice. He also announced the formation of a special committee composed of residents, historians, and architects to explore alternative development options that would be more compatible with the historic character of Harmony Springs. It was a victory, albeit a temporary one. The townspeople, realizing they still had a lot more work left to do, began to think of ideas and support all together. It wasn't for those people to lose to someone they thought had been long gone, but now returned for another round. Evie and Mac exchanged a relieved smile. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they had won a crucial round. They had bought themselves some time, and they had demonstrated the power of community solidarity. As the meeting adjourned, the townspeople gathered around George, Sarah, and Betty, offering their congratulations and expressing their gratitude. They had shown courage, determination, and a deep love for their community. Sergeant Miller approached Mac, his face beaming with pride. "You did it, Mac," he said. "You stood up to them. You showed them what we're made of." Mac, his heart filled with emotion, embraced Sergeant Miller. "We did it together," he said. "All of us." Jennifer, her initial apprehension completely gone, hugged her father tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You were amazing." George, his eyes welling up with tears, held his daughter close. He had found his voice, his purpose, and his strength. And he had done it with the help of his family, his friends, and his community. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah turned to George, her eyes shining with admiration. "You were incredible, George," she said. "You were a true leader." George smiled, his hand reaching out to gently touch her cheek. "We did it together, Sarah," he said. "We make a pretty good team." He paused, his gaze turning thoughtful. He said, "That alternative development plan you presented, it was brilliant. It got me thinking." He explained his idea, to transform the vacant lot where Burger Bliss had planned to build into a community garden, a place where residents could grow their own food, connect with nature, and build stronger relationships. He envisioned a space that would honor the past while embracing the future, a place that would reflect the spirit of Harmony Springs. Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's a wonderful idea, George," she exclaimed. "It's perfect. It would be a living memorial to Elizabeth, a tribute to the town's history, and a symbol of our commitment to sustainability." They began to brainstorm, their ideas flowing freely, their enthusiasm building with each passing moment. They envisioned raised garden beds, fruit trees, a children's play area, and a small stage for community events. They imagined workshops on gardening, cooking, and preserving, bringing together people of all ages and backgrounds. "We could call it the Harmony Garden," Sarah suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. George smiled, his heart filled with hope. "I like that," he said. "It's perfect." As they walked back towards the diner, hand in hand, George felt a sense of optimism, a renewed belief in the power of community, and a deep appreciation for the unexpected blessings that life could bring. He had unearthed the past, and in doing so, he had planted the seeds for a brighter future. That night, Evie and Max stood out with a long look toward the moon, and as they had their sights, saw it shimmer. As if, for a quick moment, there had been another guardian watching them. Max simply smiled and put his arm on her. Chapter 10. Whispers in the Spanish Moss. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. George and Sarah, fueled by their shared vision, threw themselves into the task of creating the Harmony Garden. They secured permission from the town council to use the vacant lot, rallied volunteers, and solicited donations of materials and labor. The community responded with overwhelming enthusiasm. Residents of all ages and backgrounds came together, donating their time, their skills, and their resources to the project. They cleared the lot, built raised garden beds, planted fruit trees, and constructed a small stage for community events. The garden club, led by a newly invigorated Betty Thompson, took charge of designing and planting a beautiful flower garden filled with heirloom varieties that reflected Harmony Springs' rich horticultural history. As the garden took shape, it became more than just a place to grow food and flowers. It became a symbol of unity, resilience, and the enduring power of community. It was a place where people could connect with nature, with each other, and with their shared heritage. George, despite his initial reluctance to embrace change, found himself thriving in this new environment. He discovered a hidden talent for carpentry, building benches and picnic tables for the garden. He also enjoyed sharing his knowledge of local history with the volunteers, telling stories of the people who had lived and worked in Harmony Springs for generations. Sarah, with her expertise in garden design and her passion for sustainability, became the driving force behind the project. She organized workshops on organic gardening, composting, and water conservation. She also established a partnership with a local school, creating a children's garden where students could learn about the natural world and the importance of growing their own food. As George and Sarah worked side by side, their bond deepened, their mutual respect and admiration growing with each passing day. They found joy in their shared purpose, their shared commitment to the community, and their shared love for the land. One evening, as they were working late in the garden, illuminated by the soft glow of string lights, George noticed a strange pattern in the newly planted flower beds. The flowers, arranged according to Sarah's design, seemed to form a symbol, a familiar shape that tugged at his memory. "Sarah," he said, his voice hesitant, "do you see that? The flower beds, they form a wave and a star." Sarah stepped back, her eyes widening in surprise. "You're right, George," she said. "It's the symbol from the old locket. From Lorelei. They stared at the flower beds, their hearts pounding in their chests. It couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be a sign, a message from the past. As they stood there, the wind began to blow, rustling the leaves of the trees and causing the Spanish moss that draped their branches to sway gently. The air grew thick with the scent of jasmine and salt water, a familiar Charleston perfume. And then they heard it, a whisper, faint and indistinct, like the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. The past is not dead, the whisper said. It lives on in the land, in the stories, in the hearts of those who remember. George and Sarah looked at each other, their eyes filled with wonder. They knew that the whisper was not just the wind. It was the voice of Harmony Springs, its spirit, its soul. They knew that the garden was more than just a beautiful place. It was a connection to the past, a bridge to the future, and a testament to the enduring power of memory. It reminded the pair why they worked, the very nature of what it meant. And with all this love, and what was to all connect and be, was it truly right to believe and follow, to stand with? They were ready for whatever was to come, with a good story, one where no more would ever be lost, only to find what one may have longed for, the great way of them all, together as one. It was time to follow what had now blossomed. Chapter 11. The Architect's Vision. The whisper in the Spanish moss lingered in the air, a tangible reminder of Harmony Springs' deep connection to its past. For George and Sarah, it was a validation of their efforts, a sign that they were on the right path. The Harmony Garden wasn't just a community project, it was a living link to the town's history, a conversation between generations. The following day, the garden received an unexpected visitor. Marcus Williams, the young preservation architect mentioned by Mrs. Abernathy at the Historical Society, introduced himself with a shy smile. He'd heard about the garden and, more importantly, about George's discovery of the old deed and the ensuing battle with Burger Bliss. I have to say, Marcus began, his eyes scanning the carefully laid-out beds and the burgeoning plants, this is incredible. You've all done a remarkable job. George, warmed by the compliment, gestured around. It's been a community effort. Sarah's the real brains behind the design, though. Sarah blushed slightly, dismissing the praise. George is being modest. He's got a natural eye for it, and his historical knowledge has been invaluable. Marcus, however, was particularly interested in the layout of the flower beds. He walked around them, his brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally pulling out a small notebook and sketching something. The wave and star motif, he said, tapping his pencil against the page. It's intentional, isn't it? George and Sarah exchanged a knowing glance. It is, George confirmed. It's connected to the history of this place, to a legend about a siren named Lorelei. Marcus's eyes widened. Lorelei? The sea breeze siren? I've read about her, of course, but I always assumed it was just folklore. George proceeded to tell Marcus the entire story, from his discovery of the letters in the attic to the whispers they'd heard in the garden. Marcus listened with rapt attention, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to a sense of awe. This is extraordinary, he said when George had finished. This garden isn't just a garden. It's a physical manifestation of the town's history, its collective memory. He paused, his mind clearly racing. I have a proposal, he said, turning to George and Sarah. I've been working on a design for a small community center, a place where people can gather, learn, and celebrate the town's heritage. I was originally planning to propose it for a different location, but I think it belongs here. In the Harmony Garden. He pulled out a rolled-up set of blueprints from his bag and spread them out on one of the picnic tables. George and Sarah leaned in, examining the design. It was a beautiful building, a modern structure that incorporated traditional Charleston elements, a wide, welcoming porch, large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and a steeply pitched roof reminiscent of the historic homes on Gibby Street. It was designed to blend seamlessly with the garden, its lines echoing the curves of the flower beds and the pathways. It would be a place for exhibits, for workshops, for community events, Marcus explained, his voice filled with enthusiasm. A place to tell the story of Harmony Springs, to celebrate its past, and to plan for its future. George and Sarah were speechless. It was as if Marcus had read their minds, had taken their vision for the garden and elevated it to a whole new level. "This is perfect," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. George nodded in agreement, his heart swelling with hope. "It's more than we could have ever dreamed of," he said. Marcus smiled, his eyes shining with excitement. "I'll need your support, of course," he said. "I'll have to present the proposal to the town council, and I'm sure there will be some resistance." "You'll have our support," George said, his voice firm. "And the support of the entire community. We'll make this happen." The vision had finally come and gone, but what they did next was to craft what was right. That was a great journey on its own, the love and joy they would experience next. Chapter 12. Jennifer's intervention. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Marcus finalized his architectural plans, incorporating suggestions from George, Sarah, and the garden club. Sarah refined the garden design, ensuring that the community center would be seamlessly integrated into the landscape. George, using his historical expertise, began curating materials for the center's exhibits, drawing on his family's archives and the resources of the Historical Society. But amidst the excitement and the progress, a new challenge emerged. Jennifer, George's daughter, arrived for an extended visit, her presence casting a shadow of doubt over their ambitious plans. From the moment she stepped off the plane, Jennifer was skeptical. She saw the community center project as another one of her father's flights of fancy, a distraction from the practical realities of his age and his situation. "Dad, I'm worried about you," she said, sitting with him on the porch one evening, the sounds of crickets chirping in the background. "You're pouring all your time and energy into this garden. You should be relaxing, taking it easy, not embarking on some brand new project." George sighed, understanding her concerns, but feeling a familiar pang of frustration. "Jennifer, I'm happier than I've been in years," he said. "I'm finally doing something meaningful, something that connects me to my community, to my history, to Elizabeth's memory." "But at what cost, Dad?" Jennifer persisted. "You're spending your savings, you're exhausting yourself. And for what? A building? A garden?" "It's more than that, Jennifer," George said, his voice pleading for understanding. "It's about preserving our heritage, about building a future for Harmony Springs, about creating something that will last long after we're gone." Jennifer remained unconvinced. She saw the project as a risky venture, a drain on her father's resources, and a potential source of stress and disappointment. She couldn't understand his passion, his unwavering commitment to a town that she had left behind years ago. The tension between father and daughter grew, casting a pall over the otherwise joyous atmosphere of the garden project. George found himself torn between his desire to pursue his vision and his love for his daughter, his fear of alienating her. Sarah, sensing the conflict, tried to mediate, to bridge the gap between them. She invited Jennifer to join them in the garden, to participate in the planning, to see firsthand the positive impact the project was having on the community. "Jennifer, I know you're concerned about your father," Sarah said one afternoon, as they were weeding a flower bed together. "But he's not doing this alone. He is all of us. And we're not just building a community center, we're building a community." Jennifer, however, remained resistant. She saw the garden, the community center, and even Sarah as threats to her father's well-being, as obstacles to her own plans for his future. "I just want what's best for him," Jennifer said, her voice tight with frustration. "I want him to be safe, to be comfortable, to be taken care of." "He is taken care of," Sarah said gently. "He's surrounded by people who love him, who respect him, who value his contributions. He's needed here, Jennifer. He's making a difference." Their conversation ended in a stalemate, the underlying tension unresolved. Jennifer's visit, intended to be a comforting presence, had become a source of conflict, a reminder of the different paths they had chosen and the widening gap between their perspectives. And that all had changed. Jennifer needed to have George live in what was meant, no matter the cost. She did truly love him, and it would make her the happiest to have her greatest wishes come true. Chapter 13. A living preservation. The stalemate between George and Jennifer continued, casting a shadow over the preparations for the community center presentation. George, torn between his daughter's concerns and his own passionate commitment to the project, found himself increasingly withdrawn, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet melancholy. Sarah, sensing his distress, tried to offer support, encouraging him to talk about his feelings, to find a way to bridge the gap with Jennifer. But George, ever the stoic, remained resistant, unwilling to burden her with his family problems. One afternoon, as they were working together in the garden, Sarah decided to take a different approach. She led George to a secluded corner of the garden, a small, shaded area where she had planted a collection of heirloom camellias, the same variety that Elizabeth had cherished. "These are beautiful, Sarah," George said, his voice tinged with sadness. "They remind me so much of Elizabeth." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know," she said. "I planted them in her memory. And in your honor." She paused, her gaze turning towards George. "You know, George," she said, "preserving history isn't just about saving old buildings and documents. It's about keeping the spirit of the past alive, about honoring the people who came before us, about learning from their experiences." She gestured towards the camellias, their delicate blooms a testament to their enduring beauty. "These flowers," she said, "they're a living connection to Elizabeth, to her love for this garden, to her love for this town. And by caring for them, by nurturing them, we're keeping her memory alive." Her words resonated with George, stirring something deep within him. He realized that Sarah was right. Preservation wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about people, about stories, about connections. "It's like a living preservation," he said, the phrase echoing in his mind. Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "Exactly," she said. "We're not just preserving the past, we're weaving it into the present, creating something new, something vibrant, something that will continue to grow and evolve." Her words sparked an idea within him, a way to bridge the gap with Jennifer, to show her the true meaning of the community center project. He decided to create a special exhibit for the center, an exhibit dedicated to the people of Harmony Springs, past and present. He would gather stories, photographs, and artifacts that showcase the town's rich history, its diverse cultures, and its enduring spirit. He would make it a living, breathing testament to the community, a place where people could connect with their heritage and with each other. He shared his idea with Sarah, his voice filled with renewed enthusiasm. Sarah, her eyes shining with excitement, embraced the concept wholeheartedly. "It's perfect, George," she exclaimed. "It's exactly what the center needs. It will be a place where people can share their stories, learn from each other, and build a stronger sense of community." Together, they began to work on the exhibit, gathering materials, interviewing residents, and designing a layout that would be both informative and engaging. They reached out to Jennifer, inviting her to participate, to share her own memories of Harmony Springs, to contribute to the project. Jennifer, initially hesitant, agreed to help. As she listened to her father's stories, as she saw the passion in his eyes, as she witnessed the outpouring of support from the community, she began to understand. She began to see the garden, the community center, and the exhibit not as threats to her father's well-being, but as extensions of his life, his love, and his legacy. She began to see that preservation wasn't about clinging to the past, but about building a better future, a future rooted in the values and traditions of Harmony Springs. It had seemed like a long time ago where family could be one and together. This new idea brought them all closer, so that all their work now could come to mean something great. Chapter 14. Attic Revelations. As George, Sarah, and Jennifer collaborated on the community center exhibit, a new layer of understanding and appreciation began to blossom between them. Jennifer, initially resistant to her father's passion for Harmony Springs, found herself drawn into the project, captivated by the stories of the town and its people. One afternoon, while searching for materials for the exhibit, George decided to revisit the attic, hoping to find additional artifacts that might shed light on Harmony Springs' past. Jennifer, curious to see the place that held so many of her father's memories, offered to help. The attic, as always, was a chaotic jumble of forgotten treasures and discarded relics. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating a scene of organized disarray. As they sifted through boxes of old photographs, letters, and documents, Jennifer stumbled upon a small, leather-bound diary. She opened it carefully, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. "Dad, look at this," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's a diary. It looks really old." George took the diary, his eyes widening in recognition. "That's your great-grandmother's diary," he said. "Elizabeth's grandmother. I haven't seen this in years." They sat down together on a dusty trunk, the diary resting between them. George carefully turned the pages, his fingers tracing the delicate, spidery handwriting. The diary entries, written in the late 19th century, chronicled the daily life of a young woman in Harmony Springs. She wrote of her family, her friends, her hopes, and her fears. She wrote of the challenges of living in a small town, of the joys of simple pleasures, and of the importance of community. As they read, Jennifer and George were transported back in time, immersed in a world that was both familiar and foreign. They learned about the hardships faced by their ancestors, the struggles they endured, and the resilience they demonstrated. They also discovered a surprising connection to the present. The diary entries revealed that George's great-grandmother had been a passionate gardener, a member of a women's horticultural society that had played a crucial role in beautifying Harmony Springs. She had even been involved in a campaign to protect a local park from being developed into a commercial district, a campaign that mirrored their own fight against burger bliss. "It's amazing, Dad," Jennifer said, her voice filled with awe. "It's like history repeating itself." George nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He realized that he wasn't just preserving the past, he was carrying on a legacy, a tradition of community activism and environmental stewardship that had been passed down through generations. As they continued to read, they came across an entry that made their hearts skip a beat. "Today, I planted a time capsule," the entry read. "I buried it beneath the largest oak tree in the garden, hoping that one day, my descendants will find it and learn about our lives." George and Jennifer looked at each other, their eyes widening with excitement. "A time capsule, buried somewhere in the garden. We have to find it, Dad," Jennifer said, her voice filled with urgency. "We have to see what's inside." George, his heart pounding with anticipation, agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon searching the garden, carefully probing the ground beneath the ancient oak trees, hoping to unearth the hidden treasure. They did, eventually, find what they were looking for, and this find would help the town come together once again. Chapter 15. The Trust is Born. The discovery of the time capsule ignited a new wave of excitement in Harmony Springs. The news spread quickly, drawing residents and visitors alike to the garden, eager to witness the unearthing of a piece of their town's history. George, Sarah, and Jennifer, with the help of a few volunteers, carefully excavated the area beneath the largest oak tree. After several hours of digging, their shovels struck something hard. They knelt down, their hands trembling with anticipation, and gently brushed away the soil. A small, metal box, corroded with age but still intact, emerged from the earth. George lifted the box, its weight surprisingly heavy. He carried it to a picnic table where a crowd of onlookers had gathered, their faces filled with curiosity and excitement. With trembling hands, he opened the box. Inside, nestled amongst layers of faded fabric, they found a collection of artifacts, old photographs, letters, a small, silver locket, a pressed flower, and a handwritten document. George carefully examined the document, his eyes widening in recognition. It was a statement of purpose, a declaration of principles, written by his great-grandmother and the other members of the Women's Horticultural Society. The document outlined their vision for Harmony Springs, a town that would be both beautiful and sustainable, a place where people could connect with nature, with each other, and with their shared heritage. It also called for the establishment of a trust, a fund that would be used to protect the town's natural and historical resources for future generations. As George read the document aloud, his voice filled with emotion, the townspeople listened in rapt attention. They were moved by the foresight and wisdom of their ancestors, by their unwavering commitment to preserving the beauty and integrity of Harmony Springs. "This is incredible, George," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. "This is exactly what we need. A trust, a way to protect Harmony Springs forever." Jennifer, her initial skepticism completely gone, nodded in agreement. "It's like they knew," she said. "They knew we would need this, that we would need their guidance." George, his heart swelling with pride, looked at the faces of the townspeople, their eyes shining with hope and determination. He realized that the time capsule wasn't just a collection of old artifacts, it was a message from the past, a call to action, a blueprint for the future. Inspired by their ancestors' vision, the townspeople decided to act. They formed a committee, composed of residents, historians, and legal experts, to establish the Harmony Springs Preservation Trust. The trust would be funded by donations, grants, and bequests, and it would be used to acquire and protect historically significant properties, to support community gardens and parks, and to educate future generations about the importance of preserving their heritage. George, as the direct descendant of the original signatories, was appointed as the honorary chairman of the trust. Sarah, with her expertise in landscape design and her passion for sustainability, was chosen as the executive director. Jennifer, inspired by her father's dedication and her newfound appreciation for her heritage, offered her legal services to the trust, helping them to navigate the complex legal and financial aspects of establishing a nonprofit organization. As the trust took shape, Harmony Springs experienced a renewed sense of unity and purpose. The townspeople, inspired by their ancestors' vision, rallied together, their collective energy creating a force for positive change. The trust would also help keep the future safe for them. While the town had been a simple place with simple values, it was ready to now grow to face any challenges, and the story now would be one. Chapter 16. Bridging the Generation Gap. The establishment of the Harmony Springs Preservation Trust marked a turning point, not only for the town but also for George's relationship with his children, particularly Jennifer. The shared purpose, the tangible connection to their family history, had created a bridge across the generation gap, fostering a new level of understanding and appreciation. Jennifer, initially skeptical of her father's flights of fancy, now saw his passion in a new light. She realized that his commitment to Harmony Springs wasn't just about clinging to the past, it was about building a better future, a future rooted in the values of community, sustainability, and historical awareness. She threw herself into the work of the trust, using her legal expertise to draft bylaws, secure funding, and negotiate agreements with landowners. She found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in her work, a connection to her heritage that she had never experienced before. One evening, as George and Jennifer were working late at the community center, reviewing documents and planning a fundraising event, Jennifer paused, her gaze turning thoughtful. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, I owe you an apology." George looked up, surprised by her words. "An apology?" he repeated. "For what?" "For not understanding," Jennifer said. "For being so critical of your plans. For not seeing the value in what you were trying to do. I was so focused on your well-being, on what I thought was best for you, that I didn't see what you needed, what you wanted." George smiled, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "You don't need to apologize, Jennifer," he said. "I understand. You were worried about me. You wanted to protect me. But I was wrong," Jennifer said, her voice filled with remorse. "You're not some fragile old man who needs protecting. You're a force of nature. You've inspired this whole town. You've brought us all together." George chuckled, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "I wouldn't go that far," he said. "But I am glad that you're here, Jennifer. That you're a part of this." Jennifer smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm glad too, Dad," she said. "I'm proud to be your daughter. And I'm proud to be a part of Harmony Springs." She paused, her gaze turning towards the window, looking out at the garden, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. "You know," she said, "I was thinking maybe I should move back. Maybe I could open a branch office here. I could be closer to you, and I could be more involved in the trust." George's heart leaped with joy. He had always longed for his children to share his love for Harmony Springs, to feel the same connection to the town that he did. "That would be wonderful, Jennifer," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "That would be the best gift you could ever give me." As they embraced, George felt a sense of completeness, a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. The generation gap had been bridged, the family bonds strengthened, and the future of Harmony Springs secured. The trust, guided by wisdom, would have to work with all who they cared for it would mean to have a team all together and not break them apart. The world was all connected. All they had to do was to continue working to spread more of it around for love to continue. Chapter 17. Facing the Council. The culmination of all their efforts arrived with the final town council meeting. The Harmony Springs Preservation Trust was officially established, the community center plans were finalized, and the Harmony Garden was flourishing. Now they faced one last hurdle, securing the council's formal approval for the community center project and, crucially, a zoning change that would permanently protect the historic district from large-scale commercial development like the proposed Burger Bliss. The atmosphere in the town hall was markedly different from the previous meeting. The tension was still present, but it was now tempered by a palpable sense of hope and unity. The room was packed, not just with residents, but with representatives from neighboring towns, preservation societies, and even a few state officials, all drawn by the growing buzz surrounding Harmony Springs' grassroots movement. Councilman Davidson, noticeably subdued, opened the meeting with a perfunctory summary of the previous proceedings. He then introduced Marcus Williams, who presented the final plans for the community center, emphasizing its harmonious integration with the garden and the historic surroundings. He spoke of its potential as a cultural hub, an educational resource, and a gathering place for the entire community. Sarah followed, outlining the economic benefits of the center, highlighting the potential for increased tourism, job creation, and the revitalization of the downtown area. She also emphasized the importance of sustainable development, of creating a future that balanced economic growth with environmental stewardship. Then, George stepped forward, his heart filled with a quiet confidence. He didn't prepare a formal speech, he simply spoke from the heart. "We stand here today at a crossroads," he began, his voice resonating through the room. "We can choose to follow the path of least resistance, to embrace the homogenization of our culture, to sacrifice our heritage for the sake of short-term economic gain. Or we can choose a different path, a path that honors our past, celebrates our present, and builds a sustainable future for generations to come." He spoke of his family's history in Harmony Springs, of the forgotten oath made by his ancestors, of the enduring spirit of the community. He spoke of Elizabeth, of her love for the town, of her unwavering commitment to preserving its beauty. He looked at the council members, his eyes pleading for understanding. "We're not asking you to reject progress," he said. "We're asking you to embrace a different kind of progress. A progress that respects our history, protects our environment, and strengthens our community." He paused, his gaze turning towards the townspeople, their faces filled with hope and determination. "We're asking you to choose Harmony Springs," he said. "To choose our future." As he finished speaking, a wave of applause swept through the room. The townspeople, united in their support for George's vision, stood to their feet, their cheers echoing through the town hall. The council members, moved by the outpouring of support, looked at each other, their faces reflecting a shift in perspective. Councilman Davidson, his usual smugness replaced by a look of resignation, remained silent. The mayor, her eyes shining with pride, called for a vote. The result was unanimous. The town council approved the community center project and, even more significantly, voted in favor of the zoning change that would permanently protect the historic district. Harmony Springs had won. They had protected their heritage, they had secured their future, and they had done it together. The new generation may not see all, and that there will always be another battle to fight. For that was the point. And as long as this day showed the people of this town how they stood up for one another, there would not be anything impossible. They had to believe. Chapter 18. The Weight of History, the Light of Progress. The victory at the town council meeting was a watershed moment for Harmony Springs. The approval of the community center and the protective zoning change were not just legal victories, they were symbolic triumphs, affirmations of the town's values, and a testament to the power of collective action. But the work was far from over. The community center still needed to be built, the Harmony Garden expanded, and the Preservation Trust firmly established as a lasting institution. George, Sarah, and Marcus, along with a dedicated team of volunteers, threw themselves into the task with renewed energy. Fundraising efforts were redoubled, architectural plans were refined, and construction schedules were drawn up. Jennifer, now fully committed to the cause, used her legal expertise to navigate the complexities of zoning regulations, building permits, and contract negotiations. She even began exploring the possibility of establishing a satellite office of her Atlanta law firm in Harmony Springs. The groundbreaking ceremony for the community center was a joyous occasion, a celebration of all that had been accomplished and a promise of what was to come. The entire town turned out, their faces beaming with pride and anticipation. As George, Sarah, and Marcus shoveled the first ceremonial spades of earth, a cheer erupted from the crowd. The sound echoed through the Harmony Garden, mingling with the rustling leaves of the ancient oak trees and the gentle whispers of the Spanish moss. The construction phase was a period of intense activity, but also of great satisfaction. The community center, designed to blend seamlessly with its surroundings, began to take shape, its walls rising, its roof taking form, its windows reflecting the vibrant colors of the garden. Volunteers worked alongside professional contractors, hammering nails, painting walls, and planting shrubs. They shared stories, laughter, and a sense of shared accomplishment. The building process itself became a community-building exercise, forging new bonds and strengthening existing ones. As the project neared completion, George found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. He thought of Elizabeth, of her unwavering love for Harmony Springs, of her belief in the power of community. He knew that she would have been proud of what they had achieved. He also thought of Colonel Davies, the man who had once threatened to destroy everything they held dear. He wondered what had become of him, whether he had truly changed, or whether he was simply biding his time, waiting for another opportunity to strike. He knew that, even in a place as close as them all, the thought of evil will forever remain. But as much as it can ever be there, what they have now is enough. To find a light from the past and see themselves strong in their new chapter, to not fear for what's to come and only believe. One evening, as George was walking through the nearly completed community center, admiring the craftsmanship and the thoughtful design, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was Marcus, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a single light bulb. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet pride. George nodded in agreement.
"It is," he said.
"It's more than we ever could have hoped for." Marcus turned to George, his expression serious.
"I wanted to thank you, George," he said,
"for believing in me, for giving me this opportunity. This project has changed my life." George smiled, his hand reaching out to clap Marcus on the shoulder. "You earned it, Marcus," he said. "You're a talented architect, and you have a true passion for preservation. You're going to do great things." As they stood there, admiring their handiwork, they heard a sound, a faint whisper carried on the evening breeze. It was the same whisper they had heard before, in the garden, the voice of Harmony Springs, its spirit, its soul. The weight of history, the whisper said, can be a burden, but it can also be a source of strength, a guiding light, a promise of a brighter future. George and Marcus looked at each other, their hearts filled with a sense of peace and accomplishment. They had faced the weight of history, they had embraced the light of progress, and they had built something beautiful, something enduring, something that would serve as a testament to the spirit of Harmony Springs for generations to come. It was done. Chapter 19. A compromise carved in stone. The grand opening of the Harmony Springs Community Center was a day of jubilant celebration, a culmination of months of hard work, dedication, and unwavering community spirit. The sun shone brightly, The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sounds of laughter and music echoed through the newly completed building and the surrounding Harmony Garden. The center itself was a testament to the town's commitment to both preservation and progress. Its designs seamlessly blended traditional Charleston architecture with modern, sustainable features. The wide porch, adorned with rocking chairs and hanging baskets of flowers, invited visitors to relax and enjoy the view of the garden. Inside, the spacious rooms were filled with natural light, showcasing exhibits that told the story of Harmony Springs from its founding to the present day. The centerpiece of the exhibit was the collection of artifacts unearthed from the time capsule, including the poignant letters from George's Civil War ancestor and the inspiring declaration of principles written by his great-grandmother. These treasures, carefully preserved and displayed, served as a tangible link to the town's past, reminding everyone of the sacrifices and triumphs of those who had come before. The opening ceremony was attended by dignitaries from across the state, representatives from preservation societies, and, most importantly, the residents of Harmony Springs, their faces beaming with pride. Speeches were given, ribbons were cut, and the community center was officially declared open. George, standing beside Sarah and Jennifer, felt a surge of emotion as he looked out at the crowd. He saw the faces of his friends, his neighbors, his family, all united in their celebration of this shared achievement. He saw Betty Thompson, her floral dress a splash of color amidst the crowd, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. He saw Sergeant Miller and the veterans, their faces filled with pride. He saw Marcus Williams, the architect, his shy smile reflecting the joy of seeing his vision realized. He had thanked them all before and after. He did not, however, see Colonel Davies. The former threat, the specter of corporate greed, had vanished from Harmony Springs, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease that had faded. As people began asking, it was the pair who told them no. They had found someone who they could now truly trust. As the celebration continued, George found himself drawn to the exhibit dedicated to his family history. He stood before the display case containing the Civil War letters, his gaze fixed on the faded handwriting, the words of love, loss, and longing. He thought of Elizabeth, of her unwavering support, her belief in him, and her love for Harmony Springs. He knew that she would have been proud of what they had accomplished, of the way they had honored the past while embracing the future. As he stood there, lost in thought, Jennifer approached him, her arm linking through his. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You did it. You saved Harmony Springs." George smiled, his hand reaching out to squeeze his daughter's. "We did it, Jennifer," he said. "All of us." He paused, his gaze turning towards Sarah, who was standing nearby, chatting with a group of visitors. "And I couldn't have done it without Sarah," he added. "She's been my rock, my inspiration, my partner in all of this." Jennifer followed her father's gaze, her expression softening with understanding. She had come to appreciate Sarah's strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to Harmony Springs. She had also come to realize that Sarah's presence in her father's life had brought him a happiness, a renewed sense of purpose, that he had not experienced since her mother's death. "She's amazing, Dad," Jennifer said. "You're lucky to have her." George nodded, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He was lucky. He had found love, he had found purpose, and he had found a community that he was proud to call home. As the day drew to a close, and the last of the visitors departed, George, Sarah, and Jennifer stood on the porch of the community center, watching the sunset paint the sky with breathtaking hues of orange, pink, and purple. The Harmony Garden, bathed in the golden light, seemed to glow with an inner radiance. The flowers, the trees, the pathways, all seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a testament to the love, the dedication, and the shared vision that had brought it to life. The compromise they had forged, a compromise carved in stone and nurtured in the soil, had not only saved Harmony Springs but had also transformed it, creating a stronger, more vibrant, and more resilient community. It had become better. See Chapter 20. Legacy in Bloom. The years that followed the opening of the community center were a testament to the enduring power of vision, collaboration, and community spirit. Harmony Springs flourished, its unique blend of history, natural beauty, and artistic energy attracting visitors and new residents alike. The Harmony Garden became the heart of the town, a vibrant hub of activity where people of all ages gathered to connect with nature, with each other, and with their shared heritage. The community center hosted a variety of events, from art exhibitions and musical performances to workshops on gardening, cooking, and local history. George, his retirement years anything but idle, found his true calling as the town's unofficial historian and storyteller. He led walking tours of the historic district, sharing his vast knowledge of local lore and captivating visitors with his tales of the people and events that had shaped Harmony Springs. He also taught history classes at the community center, inspiring a new generation to appreciate the importance of preserving their heritage. Sarah, as the executive director of the Harmony Springs Preservation Trust, continued to champion sustainable development, working tirelessly to protect the town's natural and historical resources. She implemented innovative programs, such as a green building initiative and a farmers market that showcased locally grown produce. Jennifer, having established a satellite office of her law firm in Harmony Springs, became increasingly involved in the community. She provided pro bono legal services to the trust, helped local businesses navigate zoning regulations, and even ran for a seat on the town council, winning by a landslide. The azaleas were now in full bloom, spreading good cheer throughout the town. They were always planted to keep them happy and to remember the love and joy that had been shared for generations. The children, too, now played in the very garden they had worked so hard to cultivate. As for George and Sarah, their relationship deepened with each passing year, their love a quiet, enduring flame that warmed their hearts and illuminated their lives. They continued to work side by side, their partnership a testament to their shared values and their unwavering commitment to Harmony Springs. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of the community center, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, George turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with a love that had only grown stronger with time. "You know, Sarah," he said, his voice a soft murmur, "I never thought I'd find happiness again after Elizabeth passed. I thought that part of my life was over." Sarah smiled, her hand reaching out to gently stroke his cheek. "Life has a funny way of surprising you, George," she said. "It's full of unexpected twists and turns, and sometimes the greatest blessings come when we least expect them." George nodded, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had found a second chance at love, a renewed sense of purpose, and a deeper connection to his community. He had found a legacy that would endure, a legacy rooted in the soil of Harmony Springs and nurtured by the love and dedication of its people. As they sat there, hand in hand, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, George felt a sense of peace, a sense of completion that he had never known before. He was home, he was loved, and his legacy was in bloom. The ghosts had passed on. They smiled and went inside to rest, for more work and love will come as days would. Epilogue. The gentle hum of cicadas filled the warm Charleston air, a familiar soundtrack to the slow, deliberate rhythm of life in Harmony Springs. Decades had passed since the tumultuous days of the Burger Bliss battle and the subsequent blossoming of the Harmony Garden and Community Center. George, his hair now completely silver, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and laughter, sat on the porch of the community center, a comfortable rocking chair creaking in time with his gentle movements. He wasn't alone. Beside him, in a matching rocker, sat Sarah. Her green eyes, though dimmed by age, still held the same spark of intelligence and compassion that had captivated him all those years ago. Her hand, gnarled with arthritis, rested comfortably in his. They watched as a group of children, their faces alight with curiosity, gathered around Jennifer, now a distinguished woman in her early 60s, with streaks of silver threading her dark hair. Jennifer, following in her father's footsteps, was leading a tour of the Harmony Garden, pointing out the heirloom camellias, the vibrant azaleas, and the towering oak tree that sheltered the time capsule. "And here," Jennifer said, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze, "is where it all began. This garden, this center, this community, it was all built on the foundation of love, resilience, and a deep respect for our history. George smiled, his heart swelling with a profound sense of contentment. He had lived a long and full life, a life filled with both joy and sorrow, with challenges and triumphs. He had loved deeply, he had lost dearly, and he had found a second chance at happiness in the most unexpected of places. He looked at Sarah, her silver hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight, her hand warm and reassuring in his. Their love story, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, had become woven into the very fabric of Harmony Springs, a legend whispered on the wind, carried on the scent of jasmine and salt air. The children, captivated by Jennifer's stories, began to ask questions, their voices filled with wonder and excitement. George listened, his heart filled with hope for the future. He saw in these young faces the promise of continuity, the assurance that the legacy of Harmony Springs would endure. The sun, now sinking ever closer to horizon and the passing time, had been their guide, to show all that could truly matter. The way they lived will all be at peace, knowing it came full circle, from the past to here in the future. As twilight deepened, casting long shadows across the garden, George felt a familiar whisper, faint but unmistakable. It was the voice of Harmony Springs, its spirit, its soul, thanking him, thanking them all, for protecting its heritage, for nurturing its community, and for ensuring that its story would continue to be told, generation after generation. He, who had wanted a peaceful home, may have now truly at last come back to one. The faces of his daughter, her children, the familiar smiles. They had him back, and he would never leave them again. It was now time to tell of the tale. The greatest journey had only just begun, with no tears, no fear, and no worries to hold them back anymore.